Welcome to the CISO Wise podcast. Join Dr. Earl Crane, founder of CISO Wise, as he interviews CISOs and cybersecurity experts on their wisdom gained from years of experience on what works and what doesn't in building a cybersecurity program. This week we're joined by Yiannis Pavlosoglou, former UK CISO for UBS. Listen to CISO Wise on the go by subscribing to the CISO Wise podcast, available on all podcast apps.
Resiliency is a relatively infant field. Questions get asked. Typical questions involve that disruption that you're describing is not going to happen, or we've dealt with disruptive events beforehand and we've survived. What's the big deal here?
This episode is brought to you by the Carnegie Mellon University CISO Certificate Program, which is named a National Center of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance Education by the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security. In the CISO program, you will learn the skills you need to be an effective CISO through targeted, interdisciplinary coursework and hands-on practical applications led by faculty from Carnegie Mellon University's Hines College and the Software Engineering Institute, including yours truly. I invite you to learn more by visiting hines.cmu.edu/CISO or follow the link in the show notes below.
Today, we're going to talk about resilient systems. From supply chain shortages to natural disruptions from changing weather patterns, it seems everything today needs to operate while under some type of duress or attack. But what do CISOs need to know to create resilient systems? And what can we learn from other CISOs who've already gone down this path? NIST defines cyber resiliency as the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use or are enabled by cyber resources. That's a mouthful, but what does it actually mean to have to build a resilient cyber program, to drive the change management necessary to build that type of program, to put in place the governance, processes, and procedures necessary? To discuss this and more, who better to talk with than Yiannis Pavlosoglou, most recently the CISO for UBS in the UK. At UBS, Yiannis was responsible for cyber and information security across the firm, facing off the regulators, namely the FCA, PRA, and Bank of England. He led the creation and execution of the regional CISO office with key portfolio activities on frameworks and establishing governance. Yiannis oversaw security operations targeting UK business, education and awareness, threat intelligence, risk assessments, and architecture. Yiannis, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure having you here. Today, we're going to talk about something that's dear to your heart, and that's the role of the CISO in operational resilience. I wanted to see first if you could provide a general introduction and a background on your experience as a CISO.
Sure, and what an intro. Thank you. So my name is Yiannis Pavlosoglou. I hold a PhD in information security, and I'm also a CISSP. Recently, I've completed the 10-year tenure at one of the large financials, 3 of which was in the role of UK CISO, a regional CISO, reporting, of course, into the group CISO. And before that role, I was responsible as change manager as the head of change in operational resilience.
Let's start with a simple definition because I'm not clear on it. What is resilience?
Resilience is being able to basically have a set of processes that when things don't go to plan, your organization is able to respond proportionally and have a response that makes sure that things continue as much as possible, of course, preventing on the disruption, to tick along as they did beforehand.
When you're looking at that, can you give any insights as you've built resilient organizations, what works and what doesn't?
Good question. So if we look at things that work as typically a set of processes that interlink, are able to have oversight for the process as it operates, and also live and breathe an evolution. So they're not static processes. They're able to adjust, evolve, become better. And those processes tend to be at the core of what we do in security as well. If we then look at the role of a CISO with resiliency in mind, we have a set of processes involving protecting the organization and being able to absorb those types of malware attacks or phishing campaigns or anything similar. That is being resilient in the context of cyber and information security. Similarly, on the opposite side of the organization, people who are not experts in cyber and information security that make the organization viable are becoming accustomed to this mentality of not if a disruption happens, but when, to be able to identify what is key, to be able to plan for that, and not to deal with technology, business continuity, or business processes as separate areas, but actually look at things holistically front to back.
So it sounds to me like the CISO is a change agent for resiliency, and for the CISO to be able to drive that forward to enable the resilient processes in their organization, where they hold standing in the organization is going to matter. What's your perspective on what does the CISO need? Does it matter where they report to, where they are in the organization to be able to be that change agent for resiliency?
Yes, and no two CISO functions will be the same. I haven't found any two organizations that have either common reporting lines for the chief information security officer or chief security officer. So it really depends on how an organization is set up. What are the common reporting lines, either into the CIO, CRO, CTO sometimes, or directly to the CEO as well. So that's around reporting, just an average assessment of depending on size, complexity, and also type of organization where you see the CISO report into. Going on to the point of change management, a very important point. Any cyber program in an organization is a program of change. You need to have people that are not only good with cyber terminology, but also you need to have people that are trained on topics of change management. Questions like how much change can an organization absorb? What is the process of adopting a new technology? How to look at establishing processes and improving them.
So it sounds like you've had some experience seeing successes in reporting structures or driving changes forward. Can you provide any insights into or examples or situations where either there was a challenge to drive a resilient organization forward because of either reporting lines or change management?
So I have been fortunate enough to have mentees, people that I've mentored in other organizations, where they've said to me, I can't pin the decision of responsibility for this topic on any one individual or function. It typically has to go to committee and oversight and so on. That would be a key area where a resilience program would drive out an improvement activity. They would report a risk around being able to basically name the individuals either accountable, responsible, or even consulted in some cases for the specific decision-making process. So then from that would come a change activity, which would be we then need to define for these responsibilities who is the person in the role who's making that decision, and also what is the process of governance for those decisions. That's one area of change management that we often see needing improvement, where organizations typically run that federated model where there's just a little bit too democracy in some of the decision-making processes that they might have.
So important takeaway from that is at the starting point, you need to have a named individual, you could say a neck to choke, who's going to be in charge of driving that resiliency. Because if you can't pin that decision authority, it'll go to a committee and it's difficult to move anything forward. Are there any other key steps that you would recommend when someone's starting up looking at building resiliency into their security program?
One of the key steps looks at the handovers between different parts of a large organization. Those are typically points where you have low tolerance to any sort of change that can have a big impact that can cause the process to fail. So imagine a delivery line, and then that leads into let's say the packaging line, but somehow those two are not interlinked in a way that if the delivery line speeds up or slows down, the packaging line does not do the same. Therefore, in a simple manufacturing example, you would have empty boxes or boxes with partial products leaving the factory. That point of handover is key. And we also see that in the context of cyber and information security. How, when you have a potential incident that comes in that corresponds to a couple of emails, to investigate if that's a phishing campaign or not, and then look at if the organization's being attacked. That requires handover typically to another team within the world of cyber and information security. So that process is consistent if the handover allows for some form of elasticity. That's one example outside of governance, just looking at the nitty-gritty detail where you need to make sure that one part of the organization talks to the other part of the organization about what is going on, and always in that oversight capacity of the person responsible, reporting up the factual changes that they're experiencing due to those disruptions.
So just like in supply chain logistics, great example, the weak point will be the handover point. And if there's a breakdown in communication, that's where we can run into a challenge. Can you provide an example of a time where you had a challenge in driving resiliency in the program and some of the ways you overcame that?
Resiliency is a relatively infant field. Questions get asked. Typical questions involve that disruption that you're describing is not going to happen, or we've dealt with disruptive events beforehand and we've survived. What's the big deal here? But what you're trying to do here is actually build a collective consensus within the organization that when something goes wrong, there's a culture of reacting to it. Now, to complement this whole process, you need to be able to, through your change program, allow for that culture to basically adopt to it. It's actually part of the fabric that the organization has. They have handovers between them, the right oversights are in place. And frankly, the difficult questions get asked between people as to if a disruption happens, will we be able to sustain it?
So I like this idea, your focus that you need to build a collective consensus. You're building a culture for operational resilience. And if you're going to try to shift that from a reactive to a proactive function, you're trying to break down silos so that teams don't see as throwing an issue over the wall, but that part of resilience means that those handoffs between teams is more effective in building those more effective processes for that operational resilience. So what is the role that the CISO has in leading that change and driving that handoff and process excellence?
So we're left in 2021 with a new term cobbled together by two words, cyber and resiliency. And if we think about some of the attacks that we've been seeing recently, you have that term materialize. Effectively, the role that the CISO has is to build a cyber resiliency program. When it comes to cyber resiliency, we want to be able to make sure that if we're dealing with a disruption that has a malicious threat actor, then that is part of a resiliency response plan. You cannot have the rest of the organization learning about dealing with disruptions and not cater for the fact that some of those disruptions might come from the domain of cyber and information security. Practically for the CISO, that means two things. First of all, they need to have an ambassador or many ambassadors actually in their team that understand resiliency, are able to sit at the same table with the people that are looking operational resilience and also be part of those initiatives to change the culture and look at processes and handovers more holistically. Second, that chief information security officer needs to be able to report back disruptions they're experiencing, something like a mass phishing campaign, straightforward, most organizations have them, which actually could be a preemptive to a larger disruption. Attackers will often send an extortion email that then will be followed by a specific activity that involves DDoS, and then in some cases, a ransomware after that. In order for a CISO to be able to react to that, they need to have mastered cyber resiliency within the organization. So they need to have mastered the ability to capture any extortion email that comes through, regardless of where it lands in the organization. They need to be able to then look at and deal with a DDoS in a way that allows for the organization to respond in the most effective way. And then also finally, when a specific ransomware attack comes, they need to be able to make sure that that is not successful. Linking those three together is where the resilience becomes part of what a chief information security officer needs to do.
So you mentioned two key things that an organization needs or a CISO needs to be able to deal with disruptions. You said that you need an ambassador, and that sounds to me a term like a BISO or a BSO, Business Information Security Officer or Business Security Officer, which is that CISO's representative embedded in the business.
Yes, so that would be one form of an ambassador role that is facing off or more closely aligned to what's happening in the business within respective divisions.
So if I can paraphrase some of what you said, it's the role of the CISO in building that resilient organization is you're part leader, part orchestrator, and then always cheerleader, trying to link these other processes together and trying to advocate through training and awareness to build that program. What have you seen that if you were to go into another organization next week and they said, we need to make this more cyber resilient, what are some key things you would make sure to have in your tool belt?
First of all, we need to be able to identify what's important to that organization. And we're used to that as cyber professionals in the context of either a crown jewels exercise or what's critical infrastructure or something similar. That's only a tip of the iceberg. So being able to identify how the organization makes money, what is revenue generating, what are the processes supporting those corresponding services. That's key for us CISO as a starting point. Then there's a deep inspection that needs to happen as to what has worked thus far. Patching vulnerabilities, dealing with phishing, and similar low-hanging fruit type of attacks. With that second ingredient, we get a view of actually what's in place now, today. And then finally, we need to know where we want to take that organization. Are we going to be expanding a program that has a multi-year span? Do we have the budget for that or the resources? That's the third and key element to be able to then start planning your change activities. And the output are a set of risks that we either want to tackle, contain, or simply assign. And depending on the level that we want to contain those risks, we build the corresponding change program that gives us the goals to be able to target these areas. Those are the three key pillars or constituent ingredients that any CISO needs to master cooking with and bringing those together for a successful cyber change program.
Now, you said the output of that is a set of risks to try to tackle to build that change program. If that's been dropped in your lap, go build us a resilience cybersecurity program. What should you know about? What should you do as a CISO?
First of all, you need to have a set of staff that are outside of the traditional technical knowledge and space of what we teach in undergraduate, masters, and in some cases, even postgraduate programs. You need change managers, you need lawyers, you need risk managers, you need people of all backgrounds, definitely of all ethnicities, because a more diverse workforce when disembarking on a change program gives you better results, as is well documented. So it's an alignment exercise. What we're looking at is being able to focus and align a group of people that often have very little in common under a goal that corresponds to terminology that is relatively new, and set them off on that direction and have clear deliverables and goals that will help them achieve that mission on the vision that you've set.
Thank you. I think that's a great point to end it. Are there any sources that you would recommend? Where should people go to learn more about operational resilience?
There's a couple of publications specific to the finance sector on defining operational resilience as part of what the UK is doing in the context of financial bodies. Those don't only apply to banks. And I think looking at that work will satisfy the more technical people. They'll learn more about impact tolerances. That's one really good starting location. The UK Financial Conduct Authority and the respective press releases on how to build operational resilience, even if you're not in the financial sector, great starting point. Just helping define that evolution of disruption under the term of cyber resilience. Definitely worth the Google search.
I also want to highlight the Carnegie Mellon CERT Resilience Management Model, the RMM. Have you had a chance to look at that any?
Oh, yes, indeed. Really fascinating work at Carnegie Mellon. I remember when it first came to my hands, it was one of those books that I couldn't stop flicking through the pages, and it almost had an answer for all. There it is. The CERT Resiliency Management Model, CERT RMM. A little bit more advanced, but a great book to set the scene on resilience.
I think that is fantastic. I appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time to share the insights about what's worked for you when building a cyber resiliency program. Yiannis Pavlosoglou was the CISO most recently of UBS UK and just recently left that one and is now independent consultant and advisor. How should people get in contact with you if they want to reach out?
Oh, LinkedIn is probably the quickest way. Happy to answer any questions on cyber resiliency and topics we've discussed here. Thank you, Earl.
Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You have been listening to the CISO Wise podcast. Join us next week when we talk to Mike Wilkes, former CISO for Marvel, about keeping Iron Man safe in digital media security. Learn more about how you can get the wisdom and insights of a world-class CISO as your cybersecurity mentor at www.cisowise.com.